Well, good morning and welcome to our live stream panel discussion about biotech trends. I'm Brett Waters. I've been in Silicon Valley my entire life, been a serial entrepreneur, and today I teach entrepreneurship at Stanford University, and I mentor startup CEOs at the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship, and I run the startup accelerator called Fourthly. And we're here to talk about biotech trends. And joining us is Marguerite. Good morning, Marguerite.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Brett, for having me.
So give us the brief backgrounder on yourself.
Well, I started out my career as a lawyer working at UCSF in the tech transfer office. And over the last several years, I've really developed and expanded my skill set into sort of general biotech management. And that covers a lot of things like business development, operations, finance. And over the last year, I've been working on a spin out of UCSF, doing some of the first experiments to try to validate the technology with a small team and a small investment. And just recently came to the conclusion that the technology doesn't work. And so over I call it a fast fail. I'm very.
I was gonna say that's why they say fail fast.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, you don't want to waste time or money on things that don't work. So I've just started looking for my next project, and just happened to hear from you and from Louis about doing this podcast, which I think coincides nicely with this sort of tour I've been doing of all my contacts in the biotech community, kind of finding out what the trends are and what I should be thinking about when I consider new companies to join.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So, Carol Bartz, who was she was CEO of Autodesk for a lot of years, and she developed what she called the fail fast forward framework, the three F's. That not only should you fail fast, but that you should fail fast in a way that kind of pushes you forward and helps develop new innovation.
Yeah.
So, what from this recent experience you had with something that failed, what do you think launched you forward?
I think what had to be a willingness to accept that conclusion, to really look at the data. And, having worked with I come from this legal background, which is a very different training, and mental logical skill set that you develop in the course of, law school and then the bar and then looking at legal problems as an attorney, versus the sort of pedagogy that you get as a scientist. So having spent so many years working with scientists, I often will listen to them talk and interpret data and see some of the gaps and the side steps they take when they are looking at data that may be a bit inconvenient for their hypothesis. So I encounter that frequently in my work with scientists and try to point it out and gently push them in the right direction, or at least to acknowledge what may not be so easy to see. And in this case, it was just, a willingness after doing many experiments to say, look, it's just not quite performing the way that it did in the academic lab. So that's, I think, a step forward.
So also joining us this morning is Louis Lowe. Morning, Louis.
Good morning, Brett. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. So Marguerite just used the word pedagogy. I think that's a $12 word. Do you know that one?
I think I could even spell it, Brett.
Louis, how are you?
Nice to see you, Marguerite. Thanks for joining.
So Louis, give us the brief background on yourself.
Well, as you both know, I'm a startup lawyer, and I help companies get formed, financed, scaled for growth, bought and sold. And as part of what I do, I spend a lot of time helping companies find the right financing structure and the right investor to help them go from here to there. And it's an honor to be here, Brett, and to continue the discussion we've been having across a variety of verticals, and talk about one of my favorites, which is biotech. And I'm so glad that Marguerite was able to make time to join us and give her experiences and perspectives.
So Louis, what is biotech?
When I think of biotech, I think small molecules that are first tested in animal models and then brought into the lab. And at some point, when you've brought the right team together and the right hypothesis, you've got some intellectual property, and you've got a path for regulatory approval, you go into the clinic. and you've got phase 1, which tests for toxicity, phase 2, which tests for dosage, and then phase 3, which tests for efficacy. And even before you get to phase 3, you have some indications of what you think the molecule is going to do. But of course, you can also have all of this impacted by other things that are happening in the world, Brett. And as you and I have talked about in the past, there's been this amazing development where mRNA can be split and can analyze and reconstitute genes and proteins much faster, which can really help accelerate all of drug discovery and target it for the right people. So that's exciting. And then finally, I would say artificial intelligence is accelerating our analysis of data. We had on our guest on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, Dipana Das from Sorcero, who's got a platform that is for big pharma companies to analyze not only the preclinical and clinical data, but also the data in aftermarket to help pharma companies identify who are the right patients that they should be giving the drug to.
So, Marguerite, you can tell that Louis bills by the hour because I asked him a simple question and he gave us a 10-minute answer.
Oh yeah.
Let me try the same question on you, Marguerite. What is biotech?
Oh, biotech is the field of study of trying to understand how to use biology to solve human health issues. Nice. So we try to leverage all these different modalities, and Louis talked about a few of them, to really understand how the body is overtaking, sort of overstepping in its normal operations, and trying to bring it back into homeostasis. So
homeostasis, boy, Louis, she knows all the big words.
I tell you, Brett, we should invite her to more of our podcasts.
I need to dumb it down. I'm sorry. No, this is such a fascinating industry of trying to really understand human biology. I think it's why I stay in this business. Again, I think I mentioned I didn't train to be here, but I love it because you're always learning something new about how the universe works in the context of the body. Mm-hmm. So, and there are millions of people who work in it who are just extraordinarily committed to finding solutions and cures and treatments for people. Yeah. And when you talk to the patients, and I have had the opportunity to talk with a lot of patients over the course of my career and their families, it's meaningful like nothing else.
Yeah. So, as we said, it's a big, when you say biotechnology, it actually encompasses a whole bunch of different things. But what do you see going on right now that you think is worth paying attention to, Marguerite?
Well, like I mentioned, I've been talking to a lot of people right now. And so just trying to get an understanding of trends, things I should look at. And I think we all know that there are a lot of new cell therapy companies coming out.
Cell therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cell therapy. And so there are a lot of people who are trying to solve like the immunogenicity of certain treatments, IO treatments, trying to improve immunotolerance of cell therapies, other gene therapies. There are people who are trying to solve manufacturing solutions with these kinds of treatments because the turnaround time can be quite long and arduous, and the investment required in order to manufacture them on that timeline is tremendous. So there are a lot of companies that are moving into this space, trying to solve little parts of it. And, one question is it going to be really taken up? Is there going to be good market uptake in cancer, or is it going to extend beyond into, other autoimmune diseases and things like that? Obviously, we have some like orphan diseases where it's really starting to make a big difference.
Right. Also joining us this morning is my friend Kent. Hey, Kent. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Yes, hello.
Welcome.
Apologies for the late start.
Not a problem. Glad you're here. So, Kent, give us the brief background on yourself.
Okay, I've been starting and leading biotech companies for over 20 years now, and this is probably my fifth biotech company. So a couple of prior companies to this were Marcadio Biotech, acquired by Roche, MB2, acquired by Novo Nordisk, and Avidity Biosciences, which is publicly traded on NASDAQ as RNA. And this company that I am co-founder, president, and CEO of, MBX Biosciences, is a little over 4 years old, and we are transitioning between phase 1 and phase 2 in our lead program, and about to undertake a phase 1 and a second program, both in rare endocrine diseases, and utilizing a platform technology which we call precision endocrine peptides.
Congratulations, and nice to meet you. I'm Marguerite.
Nice to meet you. Yes, nice to meet you, Marguerite. Sorry to barge in on the panel here late.
So Marguerite apparently understood your last sentence, but I didn't.
Okay.
So tell us again what your last sentence means.
All right. So simply, we are, as a company, focused on overcoming the inherent limitations of native peptide therapeutics. So when you think of peptides like hormones such as insulin, these have had a profound role in treating especially endocrine diseases for 100 years. But as medicines, they really require optimization. And so that is the central opportunity for MBX. And we have deep expertise on the discovery side as well as the disease area specialization. And I would just note that our scientific founder and principal investigator and inventor, Richard DeMarchi, is the inventor of Humalog, mentioning an insulin, synthetic insulin, and has been at this for 30 plus years as a leader. So and just to maybe double click on that, it's really a lot around the short half-life of peptides that require extended half-life. You also have narrow therapeutic window diseases, such as diabetes or hypoparathyroidism, to use our lead indication as an example. And so what you really want is a low peak to trough, convenient, infrequent dosing. And so that plays to the strengths of our platform technology. So our lead program, our lead investigational drug, MBX 2109, is expected to be a once weekly for the treatment of hypoparathyroidism. Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. Daniela writes in and asks about CRISPR-Cas9. I know what CRISPR is. I don't know what the Cas9 is, but either of you have any comments about that?
Well,
you want to go first?
This is a new, I'm not a scientist. I will make that disclaimer, but this is a new method of gene editing that was discovered at UC Berkeley by Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, who won the Nobel Prize for it. This is being used in clinical trials. I think it's sort of emergent right now, and Caribou Biosciences has been a leader in that, and some of its affiliates like Intellia. It's very promising. I think the limited data that's been made available so far is exciting. Obviously, there have been some ethical concerns about, using it or overusing it preemptively, for instance, in children with genetic diseases or with embryos. So I think it remains to be seen. There will definitely be a place for it in the therapeutic landscape going forward. It's just a matter of when and where and who.
Yes, agreed. And just drawing on my experience in genetic medicines at Avidity, with many of these applications, delivery is really a key challenge. These technologies have been known, such as RNAi, more recently this CRISPR-Cas9, but it's getting it to the relevant cells and organs, tissue. And so I think there's still a lot to be done there. I think one of the first CRISPR applications was, for example, ocular, where you kind of had direct application to the organ. But anyway, I think that Marguerite did a great job of framing it.
I think another thing you mentioned, and it kind of goes back to what you were talking about now, Brett, a trend that I've been seeing is this sort of selective application of gene editing with an interest in trying to improve the therapeutic index of drugs and treatments in general. So CRISPR-Cas9 RNA therapeutics would obviously be good candidates for that, but then I've been seeing it all over the place in different modalities and small molecules, ADCs, just a strong interest in trying to get the drug directly applied into the organ or tissue of interest so that you're not having systemic exposure. So I have talked with a lot of companies. I've worked on this. It seems to be an emerging trend in different biotech companies and conversations and spheres about how can we try to improve this so that we don't have as much systemic toxicity.
So a lot of our audience is investors, and kind of one of the challenging things about choosing investments in this field is that the time horizons are long, right? I'm a software guy, so I'm used to the idea of, we'll hire a team, we'll have an MVP out there in a couple of weeks, and we'll scale it up and have 1 million users by the end of the month. But biotech, you guys tend to work with a lot of long time horizons. And so, Kent, if you were an investor kind of new to this, how would you think about kind of what's going on right now, or what investment opportunities are available right now that are pretty promising in terms of paying off years down the road?
Okay, so just to help me understand, are you thinking about sort of angel investors or sort of day traders, or thinking of what to put in their IRA type of thing?
Well, let's go with Let's go with small individual investors. So I got a couple $1,000,000. So with a couple $1,000,000, I could get in on the seed level of some new deal, right? How would I think about that? How would I evaluate seed level investments in biotech companies? Or is it just pure random lottery, Kent?
I don't think it's random lottery. I do think if you look at the sector over time, it is very, very tough if you just spread your money out over the entire field. I haven't seen these data recently, but I know it used to be pretty challenging. So it's definitely a bit of for want of a better term, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. A lot is in selection. Yeah. So I think you see gravitation toward experienced teams, sort of repeat investigators who've had some success in translation. So not just a great idea, but they've stood the test of time in the clinic and hopefully to commercialization. So I would just really do your homework. Go in with your eyes open, though. You have to obviously be able to walk away from the money, because the horizons are very long. The risk is great. I mean, I don't know if you covered this before I joined, but we really are in a bit of a funding drought, which is now well into its second year. Just to be a little dramatic about it, but companies do get funded. I'm not saying they don't, and we just did a Series B last November that was over 100 million. But it's a tough environment. So you make a seed investment, and then can the company continue to get finance to execute on its vision? So I think really tough. Focus on the team. Look at what that money is going to be used for. So use of proceeds and what milestone, and get a sense that that's really going to drive the next stage of investment. Otherwise, you're out of business.
Right. So it's like any other startup investment. It starts with the fact that you're investing in the team. And then
very much so.
And then also that, kind of the capital pipeline matters, especially in this business. That because you're probably going to need to raise several times over the course of several years in this business, and so and you don't know what the macroeconomic climate is going to be like 2 or 3 years from now, and so you want to pick the teams that you think will be successful in raising in a series of rounds the amount of capital that they will need in order to get this thing to market or to get this thing to an M&A transaction.
Okay, let me add another point. I mean, there's really some excellent seed stage VCs that are highly credible. And I mean, I think they invest as early as it comes, just with an idea on a whiteboard. So getting ahead of those sometimes seems attractive, but I think really, really risky. So I would also look at, are they getting traction with those, 5 a.m.s of the world, Flagship, et cetera. I mean, we know
Right.
the group.
Right. Well, this is the advantage that big VC firms have is the distribution of risk. They can make a whole bunch of bets, whereas individual investors, that's harder. Marguerite, you want to jump in on this topic?
Yeah, I would, a couple of points. One, really echo what Ken said about execution. As I've been going around talking with folks about what's going on in the market right now, I am hearing very consistently a concern about executive teams falling down in execution and kind of a reckoning. Why is this happening? Why are these teams of seemingly experienced CEOs, CSOs, COOs not able to deliver the project milestones on time? And I think people are starting to look more deeply about, what have they accomplished before? What did they do in the past? Were they really operational in the past, or were they investors in the past? And some of these things I think are starting to come out as concerns amongst different investors from what I've talked, from my conversations with them. And from what I'm hearing about whether companies are meeting their milestones or not. So I think that the emphasis on that is increasing as the VCs are becoming a little bit, more careful about where they put their money and more careful about making sure these companies meet their milestones. But I think what you also said, Kent, about maybe skipping over the seed investors, there may be some wisdom in that in a lot of cases, because the amount of money that you dedicate or that you get from those seed investors may just not be enough to get you to a meaningful milestone in many cases, or you may have to give up early. I mean, it can just put you into kind of a crunch if you're only, working with $6, $7, $8 million and you have a big platform technology to deliver. So I would agree, if you can get yourself in front of some of the bigger VCs and get a syndicate together, that would be a better situation for you to be in.
So Mark writes in and asks about targeted alpha therapy. Is this something either of you are familiar with?
No.
Is this radiotherapy? I'm not familiar with the term, but
Okay.
I have a little understanding of radiotherapy.
Yeah.
Cell targeted.
Cell targeted.
It's a chemotherapy type approach, using a radio labeled ligand.
Yeah, those companies are starting to get funded, but there are some logistical challenges with that approach too, because you need access to a radio pharmacy or nuclear pharmacy, which I think some of these companies are starting to solve, but I'm not sure if that's what the caller was.
I'm not either.
Yeah. So let's get back to the trends thing we talked before. Biotech is a huge umbrella term, and there's all kinds of interesting things going on under that umbrella. But to you, Kent, what's most exciting to you right now in terms of what you see going on out there?
Well, let me address the elephant in the room, if it hasn't been raised, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. And so I think we are still seeing the ripple effect from this through boardrooms and through sort of investor decision making. Pharma is all over it, obviously. So you're seeing it in terms of their own pipeline prioritization, and more relevant for smaller biotech in their partnering and M&A strategy. So fortunately, we have in our entire life been very committed to rare disease. And that happens to be in our first program, though I didn't mention it, has orphan drug designation, fortunately. And we got that with preclinical data even before we started the phase 1. And so, well, without having the phase 1 readout, I should say. So that was really fortunate, because now in this, come last fall, whatever, we're seeing that's kind of a little protected, at least for a bit longer. Smaller molecules, so biologics, maybe some of the other gene therapies we've talked about, but it's a pretty low threshold for what they consider a small molecule, and that is, and some peptides are folded in, like the like the incretins in obesity treatment, and those would be subject, if they're not, if they don't have the orphan drug designation waiver, to or protection, if you will, subject to price negotiation, which is concerning to some pharma. And I like to think in biotech, even though we're building, our vision is to build a fully integrated biopharmaceutical company, we think of pharma as the ultimate customer. I mean, I think you sort of have to make that assumption on some level and pay real close attention to how they are seeing the world. I know our investors do.
So on the topic of the IRA, Ezra Klein had a great podcast last week where he talked about, there's all this money available for these projects that are kind of transformative projects, but the permitting and approval processes are still so onerous that just providing funding doesn't mean that they'll see the light of day in less than 10 years. And so it gives an interesting discussion about how in addition to providing the funding, there also should be some easement of the permitting and approval processes that are required for some of these projects. So anyway, if you missed that podcast episode, I recommend it, Ezra Klein. Marguerite, you want to jump in on the topic of what's going on that's worth paying attention to?
Well, I think there is quite a lot of interest in the degrader space. I think degrader, yeah. So drugs that are looking to degrade proteins rather than inhibit them. I think people have been looking at the recent, clinical successes at Nurix and Arvinas and wondering what's next, who's going to move into this space to kind of take it to the next level with maybe higher value targets, into different areas of the body, more specificity for tissues. So that's something I've been hearing a lot about from different investors. Like they're excited to see what happens across all these different companies that are moving into various degrader platforms.
Interesting. So Prem writes in and asks about something called the Innovative Genomics Institute, Berkeley. Either of you familiar with this?
No, but I think I did catch a headline about this, but I don't know much about it.
All right. Well, our audience is providing all kinds of questions that are stumping the panel today. Louis, you have been uncharacteristically quiet. I'm sure you have things you're dying to ask.
After my 10-minute definition of biotech, I thought I needed and maybe eat a taco, Brett. But you typically ask me about the financing markets, and so maybe I'll just jump in with a few comments there. And I'd say that for the past 2 years, we've seen a really challenging environment in the public capital markets. And what's different about biotech fundraising than tech fundraising, Brett, is that fundraising in the public markets or going IPO is really just an extension of the venture capital process, where you have sophisticated mutual funds who are public investors who invest in this asset class well before it has proven technology when it's just in the clinic. And so when the public markets go south on the sector, it really impacts valuations as well as people's appetites to invest in earlier stages. So I think seed has been really challenged, and in each stage of biotech has been challenged because on the one hand, investors are not seeing the returns, and companies don't want to sell equity at the low prices that would clear the market in order to get a transaction done. And so, we're seeing a lot of transactions getting done where you have repeat founders who have built a really great team, who've built an advisory board of preeminent doctors in the space where there is a clear market application. I think there's a desire to invest in a platform rather than a molecule, meaning that something that's going to be able to generate multiple pharmaceuticals. And then there's a requirement to have, various different types of asset classes come into your capital stack. So not only are you going to have a venture capital form, but you may have an endowment, like the Pancreatic Cancer Foundation, PanCan, is a very important investor in that space. And so there's one. You have Big Pharma itself has large corporate venturing groups who will invest in companies from an early stage. And so if you can stitch together that team of investors, management, and obviously, on top of an idea that has a big potential application, that's where the home runs are. And we're still seeing those happen, Brett, like we do in every market. And we know in a down market is when the most exciting opportunities happen with the greatest returns. And so I continue to be really excited about the space.
A lot of great companies have been born during down markets. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just tying together some of the threads from each of you. So Kent and Lou, you both talked about the importance of investing in a proven team that has done this before. And Marguerite, you mentioned that you're kind of hearing on the street investors complaining about some teams that are not executing. And these things probably tie together, right? And that those may have been startups that were invested during the capital market environment of 3 or 4 years ago, where people were throwing money at everything. So I think probably all those things tie together. That lots and lots of investment opportunity, and that the chances of success are much higher with a proven team.
Yeah, I also wonder whether it's a result of early buyouts of companies, because if you sell your company fairly early in the game, and you're operating, you're doing whatever your position is in that small startup, but you don't get very far into clinical trials, you're not actually going to get the learnings of what it's like to kind of suffer through a 3+3 dose escalation and waiting for the TEAEs to come out and waiting for the dose escalation calls. And, all of that struggle that can take years to get through a dose escalation to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, that is a proving ground for operators. And if companies over the last 10 years have been selling to pharma or licensing fairly early, then your operators in those small companies aren't getting that experience. And so I kind of wonder whether there is maybe a lack of personnel available who have really seen every aspect of the process. And then you combine that with folks coming out of pharma who, work in tremendously resourced environments, but also siloed. They may not have like the through line to the next step if they're only working on one part and if they're highly specialized. So I think it's maybe a mix of all of those factors that's sort of coming together. And what I'm hearing, lots of companies are falling down in execution, and that there isn't a lot of guidance for some of the junior scientists to draw on from the leadership positions. So I'm just curious about where it's coming from.
Yeah, interesting.
But I'm also seeing, and I wonder whether this is related, a lot of female-led teams, a lot of new female CEOs coming on board, and teams with female CEO, COO, multiple, women on the executive team. So I'm excited about that as a woman, of course, but also because it points to a different direction of leadership within these companies. Maybe more intentional, because women have had to be more intentional about how they show up in the workplace.
Yep. Well, I've got 5 daughters, so I'm all about the girl power.
Good.
So this is a great conversation, and we could go on for a long time, but we need to wrap it up. So I'd like to ask you guys a question, which is, if I gave you $10 million to invest somewhere in the biotech field right now, where would you put it? And Kent, you're not allowed to invest it in your own company. Where would you put $10 million right now, Kent?
Okay, well, a sector that I really believe in, which is not rare endocrine disease is in the broader endocrine field of obesity management. And I just continue to see unmet need there. And having returned from the American Diabetes Association scientific sessions and, seeing some of the exciting data presented that, the world did through the mainstream press, it's a paradigm shift. And so I think there's still a lot of upside there, and, excited to see how that will help
Obesity
the
management.
populace,
Yeah.
which is, in need of it.
I just recently read a study that said that fast food now kills more people every year than cigarettes. So obesity and kind of the results of dietary choices are definitely an issue. Marguerite, $10 million. Where are you going to put it?
Something in immunology.
Immunology.
Yeah. I think, I've been talking to lots of people, and I've worked in oncology my whole career, and everybody says investors are chasing past returns on that front. Which, may or may not be true, but there certainly is a lot of investment in that space. But immunology, it's interesting. I mean, these patients live a long time. And so you get a lot of opportunities to try new treatments for them. And if something doesn't work, they can move on to the next one. And hopefully they're going to live a normal lifespan. So, you have many, many more months and cycles for potential return on investment just by virtue of treating those patients. So that might be where I
immunology. Right.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. All right, Louis, you got any final thoughts? This has been a great conversation, don't you think, Louis?
I do. I'm going to answer your question though, because I invest for love or I invest for money. And investing for love, my wife's had breast cancer. My mother passed from pancreatic cancer. My father has prostate cancer. So it seems like the more I learn about these cancers, the more they're proliferating, and the more there are solutions out there that can change, the course of human life. And so I'd go there. Investing for money, I would do it with a team of people that I know and trust, and they are the scientists, and I would follow their direction as to the where. But I think for successful company building and investing, you need a rock star team, and I'm just one leg of the stool as the legal side of that. But I'm really excited to see Marguerite, a recovering lawyer, become an entrepreneur, and to meet you, Kent, and Brett. Thank you again, as always, for putting these great conversations together.
You bet.
Yeah.
It's a good conversation. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much.